Good evening, it's Tony here from Lockster Reads with the second video of the 8th day of Remembrance Reads, which I hope you'll find interesting. This is what I read today. Well, that's where do we begin? Well, I actually got back to Ernest Hemingway. I read 3 chapters, which are his return to the front after his injury, the Austro-Hungarian and German attack, and the Italian retreat, the start of the Italian retreat. 3 really good chapters actually. I'm finding the love story a bit of a drag. I'm finding the war stuff very well written and very interesting. I'm not sure he can write love or women that well. I could be being harsh because the book's, I'm not anywhere near the end of the book, so maybe I should save my judgment to the end. Actually, the one thing that did remind me, there's a character in here called Rinaldi, who is an Italian surgeon, who I think could have slotted into a MASH as a main character with his despair, tiredness, cynicism about the war. So we're back on this case. I'm going to try and finish this tomorrow. There isn't a lot to go, but I'm not promising anything. I want to sort of get onto another fiction book. Then I read another short story from the Penguin book of First World War stories. I should get the proper title of that. It'll be in the notes. That was by Mary Borden. Blind. I made a video about Mary Borden last year in Remembrance Reads, and Blind is in her book The Forbidden Zone. I recommend The Forbidden Zone. I think it's a brilliant book. Mary Borden was a nurse. She was American, but she was a nurse in the French army, a nurse with the French army. It's a quite it's a dark story, Blind, and it's about how in a situation like she was in, you can fend off breaking by not thinking about things until you're forced to think about things, and then you'll probably break. Everyone has a breaking point. In fact, one of the things that all this stuff reading on the First World War has led me to is it's more astonishing that more men and women didn't break, that the whole thing didn't grind to a halt as armies collapsed out of stress and fear and whatever. We'll come on to that. It might be one of the things I talk about at the end of the month. Then I read chapter 5 of The Great War and Modern Memory, which is called Oh, What a Literary War. That's about sort of how literature impacted on how people first of all dealt with the war, then responded to the war, and the language that was used in the war. And afterwards, it's quite interesting on the persistence of phrases from World War One through to virtually the present day. I mean, some of the ones that listed, like barrage, as in barrage of complaints, a barrage of whatever. Crummy and lousy are both from World War One. He talks about the fact that the old British term for something you bring back from a holiday was a keepsake, but because so many people were in France, by the time the war ended, that word had started to disappear or become a more specific thing, and souvenir replaced it. The French word basically replaced it. The way people talk about sectors, the way people talk about rank and file, no man's land, and lots of other expressions from World War One. Trench coats are obviously a World War One thing. They were called actually Burberrys by the British because they were made by Burberry, or for the officers' ones were made by Burberry. I'm not sure what the rank and files were made of. He talks about the sort of how the canon of English literature was used. He talks also about the differences. One of the things I should say is Paul Fussell is actually an American. He was a veteran of World War Two. So some of the things he says about America, because I'm going to read a quote from him. It says, if censorship was one inhibition on the truth, another was the British tendency towards heroic grandiosity about all their wars. Americans and British have always been divided on the matter of the style thought suitable for war. It is significant that what the Americans call the unknown soldier, the British elevate to the unknown warrior, which I thought was quite interesting. And he quotes Barbara Tuchman, who she's talking about British accounts of the military performance in Burma, and I'll quote Paul Fussell here. He says, "She says with some acidity, no nation has ever produced a military history of such verbal nobility as the British. Retreat or advance, win or lose, blunder or bravery, murderous folly or unyielding resolution, all emerge alike clothed in dignity and touched with glory. Everyone is splendid, soldiers are staunch, commanders cool, the fighting magnificent. Whatever the fiasco, aplomb is unbroken. Mistakes, failures, stupidities, or other causes of disaster mysteriously vanish. Disasters are recorded with care and pride and become transmuted into things of beauty. Other nations attempt, but never quite achieve the same self-esteem," which made me laugh. I think and I think he talks about British phlegm and how that it is reflected in the language. I suppose that's phlegm. I think he means basically stiff upper lip. The way you respond. No, actually, stiff upper lip is probably not quite right. But it's basically the response to terrible things by sort of underplaying them, or making light of them. He talks the one example he uses. I'm trying to find what there was an example. Oh yeah, and also he talks about the fact that he thinks Hemingway's style was influenced by as an imitation of the Great War style of British phlegm. Phlegm is a horrible word in that circumstance. I don't like it because it's. And he talks about the way boys' own language was used, cliches that come out of it, euphemism, the way soldiers realised that nobody really wanted to hear the unvarnished truth, so euphemism replaced it both in sort of private discussions between soldiers and their families and in public government descriptions of what was happening. In fact, he sort of says that this is when governments euphemising what was going on started, and that it rolled into World War II, to Vietnam. You could tell, I think, that this was written in the sort of around Vietnam, and that Fussell is American because Vietnam is a sort of tinted shadow on the edge of this book. And then I started the final reading of the day. I tell you what, Paul Fussell's book is really, really good. I'm not sure I agree with him on everything. I'm not sure I know enough to disagree with him properly. I do think he is still focused, I think, quite a lot on a certain type of British officer. But he does talk about the rank and file. I've started using rank and file in this video loads of times now. He does talk about the rank and file in a bit more detail sometimes. He talks about the fact that because education had become... Basically, I'll read the quote. It's on the one hand, the belief in the educative powers of classical and English literature was still extremely strong. On the other, the appeal of popular education and self-improvement was at its peak, and such education was still conceived largely in humanistic terms. And that reminded me of Jonathan Rose's book, The Intellectual Life of the British Working Class, which I found a really fascinating read. But that talks about how working class British people were often autodidacts and read broadly and widely. They obviously read lots of fiction, like people do now. They read bestsellers, but they also read... there's a great section in it, from what I remember, of what books were taken out from Welsh miners' libraries, and it is quite an incredible example of men and women trying to educate themselves in politics, philosophy, economics, particularly obviously Marxism. But I recommend that book. I'll throw that in as a recommendation for you there, alongside The Forbidden Zone by Mary Borden. I'll put a link into my Mary Borden video in the show notes. And then finally, I started The White War: Life and Death on the Italian Front, 1915 to 1919 by Mark Thompson. I only read the introduction of this, but it's actually quite good because it sets out the geographical limits of what he's going to be talking about, but also explains why it's important. He says here, this is just he basically says the war in Italy went in 3 phases. The Italians in the before 1917 had gained 30 kilometres of ground at the cost of 900,000 dead and wounded. And he says like battles like Isonzo and Cavero are the Somme Gallipoli equivalents for the Italians. The Italian army was very badly led and very poorly treated by its officers. He talks in the introduction about the fact that they actually would decimate units, as in the proper use of decimate. So they would take 1 in 10 men from a unit and execute them if they failed to do what they were told to do. Their execution rate for cowardice and not obeying orders was apparently a huge amount higher than the British armies. And then in 1917, the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians attacked and drove the Italians back almost as far as Venice, and things looked very dodgy. But then the Italians in 1918 finally beat the Austro-Hungarians in a battle, and then the Austro-Hungarians just fell apart, and Italy went to victory. And as he says, his book, I quote, this is the story of the crisis, recovery, and victory. So I had a good reading day today. Actually, my mood is still a bit discombobulated, but I feel like I actually achieved something today. And I also watched Oh, What a Lovely War, which I have done a video about, which you can look at below. So that's where we are. So a good reading day today. And I've done another video on dates, so it's 8 days of doing these videos. Whether this can keep up for another, 30 days, 30 days of September, April, June, November. So another 22 days is going to be interesting. I have no idea if anybody cares about these videos at this point, but I am actually finding them quite useful for keeping me on the straight and narrow. There have been days this week where if I wasn't doing these videos, I would have not done any reading at all, because I would have just crawled into my bed and cried for a week. So it's been enjoyable. So thank you everybody for, even if only 1 or 2 people are watching these, at least it's getting me to get out of myself. And tomorrow I'm going to try and make a big chunk into Ernest Hemingway, because I said I would like to read something else. It's not setting me on fire. It's not terrible. It's definitely not terrible. And some of it is very, very good. But it's not really what I was expecting, I don't think. And perhaps that's part of the problem. So that's it. So stop rambling, because I can get this under 15 minutes. Have a good evening if you are in the United Kingdom. Have a good brackets, whatever your time zone is for anybody else. And I will speak to you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.